Hi, this is Mr. Mitchell with another video. Go ahead and write down the questions and get the answers as we go along. Today we're going to talk about cells and what is life. All things living, plants and animals, have some kind of cellular organization. And you probably know this, but cells are so small you'll need a microscope to see them. And you can see in the background here that we have pictures of cells right here. Do have some terms that have to go with cells. One is unicellular. You probably picked up from the prefix that a unicellular organism has one cell. That's usually a very, very small organism, just has one cell. Bacteria is an example of a unicellular organism. So most of the organisms are multicellular. We are multicellular. More than one, of course. There are multi-cells in these kind of organisms, and all cells are not the same in multicellular organisms. Cells are specialized. The cells that are in your lungs perform different functions than the cells that are in your arm muscles, for example. Nerve cells have a different function as well. All these cells are designed to do specific tasks, which helps the organism function. And humans are made of trillions of cells, according to scientists. So what's in these cells? Well, one thing, the most abundant thing in these cells is water. I don't know if you can see this very well or not, but what's in cell? The most abundant thing is going to be water. Number two, another thing that happens to be in cells are carbohydrates. I'll just abbreviate that as carbs. Another thing that happens to be in cells are proteins and lipids. We'll study a lot more about proteins and lipids as we continue on with the study of the cells. And see if I can look on my notes and find the fourth thing that happens to be in cells that we're going to mention today, of course, and that would be nucleic acids. Nucleic acids is like DNA. Nucleic acids. So the water is the most abundant thing in the cell. The carbohydrates help provide. They're the main energy source. The carbohydrates are. The proteins and lipids are building materials of all cells, and the nucleic acids are the genetic materials in the cell. I do have a couple of terms over here I'd like to define: stimulus and reaction. If you have a stimulus, you have a change in an organism's surrounding. Now that change in the surrounding causes some kind of reaction. For example, light. A loud sound. Those are things that are defined as a stimulus. The reaction, of course, is the organism's response or change in behavior. By definition, to have a stimulus, you do have to have a reaction. Living things grow and develop. Living things also produce offspring or reproduce. Now, hundreds of years ago, people didn't understand that you had to have cells in living things and that you couldn't get living things from unliving things. They thought it was common acceptance, incorrect acceptance, that you had something called spontaneous generation. Spontaneous generation is the idea that living things can arrive from non-living sources. It's a very popular myth, and it took like hundreds of years for people to not believe that that was true. And here are a couple of the experiments, that's a word I'm looking for, a couple of experiments that helped convince people. One of the myths was that if you took a piece of meat and left it out and it started rotting, that fly maggots would come from it, that you could produce these baby flies from the rotten meat. So a scientist, I'm trying to remember his name right now, but a scientist ended up having flasks with different kind of tops and one without a top to prove that if you do have things sealed, that you do not get any kind of life coming from the rotten meat. That what you had was that flies would come in and land on the meat, and they would lay the maggots, lay the eggs there, and it just appeared that flies were coming from it because it was from an outside source. Also, we had Pasteur that had this test of spontaneous generation. This is broth, and the broth also appeared to have, or the rumor was that you could have live things, flies, etc., bacteria, I think was probably the main source there, that would grow in broth. But it would grow in broth, but it would not whenever you had the top sealed up. When you had the top sealed up, you did not ever get live something out of dead something. That you had to have the bacteria, the top open for the bacteria to get in the first place. And whenever you had the bacteria get in, that's when the other bacteria would end up producing. So it took hundreds of years for people to finally realize that that was indeed the case. All living things have some needs, whether they're humans, whether they're all the way down the food chain to bacteria. They all need water, food, place to live, and stable living conditions. Now, I do have a couple of terms that have to do in this case with food. Autotrophs are organisms that can make their own food. Well, they're plants. Plants have chlorophyll, and through photosynthesis, they make their own food. Heterotrophs, as I'm sure you probably can guess, do not make their own food, but they have to get their food from another source. So heterotrophs end up eating autotrophs. Whenever we eat some lettuce or some broccoli, we are a heterotroph eating an autotroph, just as a corny example. Looking at my notes to see if there's anything that I have not put in there. I do have a note that organisms compete for the oxygen, for the food, and for the shelter. And I guess it would be heterotrophs that would compete for the food part. There's another final term, homeostasis. Term homeostasis means the maintaining of stable internal conditions. We as humans need to have a constant body temperature. We need to have our cells hydrated. We need to have good oxygen levels. And cells do not work well whenever you have inconsistent body temperature, hydration, oxygen levels, and so on. So all organisms try to reach homeostasis, that is a maintaining of all those essential things there, the keeping of a stable condition. Hey, don't forget to go back and do the questions. Hope you learned a little bit about cells.